Wired for Winning, celebrating the extraordinary minds of those with ADHD. Hi everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of Wired for Winning. We have quite an incredible story today with today's guest, Thor Reinhardt. It's every week I do this podcast with a new guest, and every week there's some story that kind of gets me emotionally and physically, but particularly in Thor's case, I think that it's a wonderful story of kind of success in its own right. So, please listen to this as much as you can and take from it what you can from the takeaways afterwards. Thor, you're very welcome to this podcast, Wired for Winning. Thank you for taking the time. I know we've been talking for a while now, and you've been traveling a little bit as well. So let me just do this. And there we go. Welcome to Wired for Winning, sir.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for such a wonderful introduction. I hope I will be able to bring it justice.
I'm most certain you can, actually, very much the case. So let's start off. You yourself, I was doing some background research on your history and conversations we've had around your own diagnosis of ADHD and that of your children as well, which we'll come on to. But just tell us a little bit about you, and tell the audience about your journey with ADHD pre and post diagnosis and what that's meant to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, something that hit really hard for me was when I finally was diagnosed with ADHD just 2 years ago at 38 years old. And the psychiatrist said, you must have had a really traumatic life. Your story is traumatic. And it's this moment where you realize that you just unboxed something really, really powerful, like really life-changing. Someone telling you that your life was traumatic. It really hit me hard because I never saw it like that per se, right? I grew up in a relatively small village. I've had a very privileged upbringing, and a lot of people will be like, well, wonderful of you having everything, but I always knew that I was different. I always felt different. And the thing that I was a challenge growing up, and it's very interesting because I remember as a young child, when I was about 10, my parents did actually take me to a psychiatrist. And, in a letter, all the symptoms of ADHD were outlined, right? Focused when interested in certain topics and all that kind of stuff. Can't sit still, moves around, and all these kind of things. But it was always overshadowed by our family situation. So my father was a very successful businessman. I had everything that I ever could ask for. My own bedroom, all the toys that I could ever imagine. But with my father's fame came a lot of bullying, especially because our village was so small, and he was untouchable, obviously. And, the bullying got so extreme when I was in boarding school, as my parents thought that that it would help me become a little bit more open and extroverted. That I found myself standing at the ledge of the window, thinking that I can't take this anymore. And I know that I am not the only one who feels like that from an ADHD or neurodiverse perspective, and that is why I try to be so open about it as well. because there could have been a chance that I am not here. And so many people are already not here because
I'm glad
of bullying, of experiencing things
yes,
like this.
I'm glad you are. On a personal note, I'm glad you are. I'm glad that, you know, that the message here for me is that irrespective of your socio-economic background, whether you are from a poor background or a wealthy background, you know, the connotations and the symptoms and the environment that ADHD can distort, if you like, you know, crosses all of those boundaries. And that's why I'm so pleased to hear that you're open and you know, I set up, this is a consistent message, Thor, I set up this particular podcast not to do anything else other than find people in the world with ADHD who have made a success of their lives, so that those who feel today like you do or you did on that ledge that day can take some justice from that and perhaps hopefully turn their lives around a little bit. And I'm so delighted to hear you say that. I really am. It's the lowest point that I think a human being can get to in their lives. Keep going with your story, sir, please.
No, I appreciate that. That's you know, I mean, at the end of the day, the one thing that you know stopped me from pulling through was my 2-year-old brother. So we have 11 years between us, and the thought of not actually being able to see him grow up was kind of my motivating factor to stay alive. Essentially, for me as a man, it was very and looking at it retrospectively, that was the moment where, or what kind of led to it, was the silence surrounding the suffering that I was going through, right? And it's everything was internalized, and I didn't speak up. And you know, I used the phrase like silence is deadly, right? It's I didn't speak up about the bullying that I was getting because I thought it was just going to get worse if I say anything. And I think that was kind of like the pinnacle, the foundation of my TEDx talk was about, we need to speak up about the things that we are struggling with. And you know, therapy and talking to you know, on topics that are uncomfortable for others, we need to talk about them, because we can't blame them for treating us differently, because that we need to move away the ignorance that is in this space, right? And you know, there's been so many struggles that I blamed myself for, right? And I didn't know this until I got my diagnosis. An example was that, you know, as a last resort, we kind of managed to get working on an energy project in Bolivia in South America. And, you know, I'm amazed of how quickly I was able to learn Spanish, right? We kind of somehow we managed to, long story, but anyway, we managed to get a collaboration agreement in place with the Bolivian government. And that was primarily down to my hyperfocus. I didn't appreciate what that meant at the time, but that same hyperfocus that got us our prototype built in Bolivia, presented to the Bolivian president and the whole cabinet and all of that, 2 weeks away from signing a collaboration agreement worth $20 million, was the same hyperfocus that led to their downfall, because civil unrest broke out and I held on so tightly to that vision and that mission. So it was that combination of hyperfocus and just the sensitivity that then kind of meant that I lost it all. And for years, for absolute years, I cannot tell you how many, I was blaming myself for that failure. And it was thanks to my diagnosis that I was able to understand my behavior then, that I was finally able to make peace with that.
That's interesting. There's two things actually that come to mind. It's a fantastic story with the energy project in Bolivia. I think there are two things that have come to my mind when you say that. One is people talk about the printing press in history as a spark of evolution, in human, humans moving forward, and they talk about these points in time. And I think one of the unsung points in time actually was the coffee bean being discovered and transported around the world, like tea was on the East India Dock Road, from India into London and beyond. And I think also, in addition to the use of caffeine on the human brain, ADHD has been around forever, and that hyperfocus that a proportion of the population have naturally, that dopamine high and that ability to laser focus, is one of those human evolutionary pivotal points in time. And one of the years ago, I used to, I've never mentioned this on the podcast before, but years ago I used to earn money from hypnotherapy, way before I was myself diagnosed. And one of the metaphors that I used to use with people was that if you get a magnifying glass and you hold that up to the sun and you've got a piece of paper behind it and you keep moving it around, you'll never burn through the paper. But if you hold it still, it will burn through the paper. And that's what hyperfocus does, I feel, And the second thing,
I couldn't agree more.
It's kind of true, right? And thanks be to hyperfocus. What a wonderful attribute to the gift that we have when we understand what it is. That it's not this curse, that this disability, that it is actually beneficial to the world. And I was watching, the second thing that came to mind, apologies for talking so much, but because this is your story, but the second thing.
No, absolutely. No, absolutely.
But the second thing that came to mind, and I was watching this last night, a wonderful gentleman, and he was talking about the number of inputs that the human brain has had since, and he referenced 2 points. He said in 1970, a family would wake up in the morning, they'd sit together and they would have breakfast. And, the father or the mother, they would go to work and school and they'd come home in the evening and they'd have about 100 inputs into their brain in a day. And then you fast forward to 2024, where we have the social media, we have the smartphones, we have the telephone calls, we have the podcasts, we have the YouTube, the TV shows, and today's human brain is receiving approximately 100,000 pieces of information. No wonder we, with ADHD, are getting overwhelmed in this world,
Absolutely. And actually, and it's on that note, it got so bad that it's debated whether social media addiction exists or not, and but there was a time where I was out of control, with there's Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everywhere, right? And at the end of the day, it was very hard. It was almost one of the hardest things to do, to deactivate my Instagram account. It felt like I was an addict, right? But to be quite honest, having done it and consistently stayed off Instagram was life-changing. I used to have an Apple Watch. I don't have it anymore because I wanted to remove myself so much from the screen time. Because I have the computer, I have my phone, I had the watch, and it's like constant distractions from everything. And I think I realized that I was my phone slave, but I want my phone to be my slave instead. I want to have a control of what I use my phone for and not social media. And look, can you blame the social media companies? Well, morally, yes, but obviously they've invested millions and millions with psychologists and X, Y, and Z to get us hooked. It's not an accident what's happening.
It's by design. I agree with you. One of the common themes that seems to be running through this particular podcast and the people that I'm talking to, and there was a wonderful lady on a few episodes ago by the name of Cassandra Clemens, who you may know. She's Swiss German, lives in the United Kingdom, and she was diagnosed at 58 with autism and ADHD. And one of the takeaways that she gave me from that was that to control the high, to not allow yourself to get too high on the dopamine. And since then, because this is therapy for me, this podcast, right, as well. I mean, it's a personal therapy, as I hope it is for others. But I've been doing a lot of work on looking at what's called dopamine detox, which, what you've just described there about disconnecting from your Instagram account, deleting that and feeling better for it and being in control of it. Is it wrong of me to say that you're controlling your high? Are you now at a state of controlling it, or is that one part of many, if I may ask?
I think for me, I think it had to be extreme. I needed to deactivate it and delete it completely, because there is not like, oh, let's do 10 minutes a day. For me, that didn't work, because I was so dopamine deprived, but, I didn't get it in a healthy way. So, rather than going on Instagram, I would go on the treadmill, right? And find healthy ways. I mean, something that works for me is writing. I enjoy writing. It gives me a lot of satisfaction, because that is the best way for me to channel my thoughts and kind of find acceptance in myself. If I'm in a challenging place, writing it down helps me kind of overcome that. But by then using the time to scroll on any social media, I'm just satisfying that hunger, but without processing the problem. If that makes any sense.
It very much does, actually. Yeah. I have these very similar points in my life where I want to consume a huge amount of information. And if I don't stop and the analogy I use is to allow my brain to process and defragment like a computer hard drive, then it leads to dissociative behavior, where I'm really sometimes emotionally unstable or whatever. So I have to be very careful with that. Just going back to your ADHD, you talked briefly prior to diagnosis, of the classic letter from the psychiatrist around, focusing on things that you were interested in, and and the hyperfocus with the Bolivian story as well. Do you have any other other presentations of ADHD that relate to classic symptoms, like, if I may, emotional control, or are there any physical attributes at all that distill?
Oh, the list is endless. I think one of the biggest problems that was eye-opening for me, and it caused me, in retrospect, this has caused me a lot of issues, is understanding that I've been a people pleaser, right? And, trying to always, be the yes man to everything, trying to please everyone, but then feeling absolutely horrendous when I realized that you can't please everyone. And the problem that comes with that is that the least person you're actually pleasing is yourself. And when I came to realize that and it's with acceptance, right? And the becoming aware that that really gets you into the cycle, right? Because when I became aware, I felt horrible about it, because I dipped into a real low before I could process the awareness and actually make it into a positive. So the whole people pleasing, I felt shame, I felt guilt about it when I became aware of it, right? But now I feel more empowered, and I feel more confident about myself, about what I want to do. I think generally in society today, whether neurodiverse or not, being able to say no is a skill that not many people have mastered.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Yeah, I think you're right. It's very tough, even for me today, to say no to people. I can do it, but it makes me feel terrible that I've let somebody down. I was talking to somebody last week about potential business idea, which would involve employing people. And I said, I love the idea. The capability between us is there. We can do that. But I would be very cautious about stepping into a business that we would grow and employ people, because I think I would let them down, because I wouldn't have the interest for long enough in order to facilitate that, and I wouldn't want to affect their lives. And that sense of, when I think through that process, the guilt that I feel is the same sense of guilt I feel from sometimes saying no to people. I still feel that way, even though I'm able to say no now.
Yeah.
Can I just ask then, Thor, how did you reach this cathartic change in your ability to say no and to be empowered? I mean, did you read? Did you seek a therapy? Have a coach?
It's it's very I mean, I've worked with. I think the biggest life-changing thing was when my father passed away in 2014. I had just secured fresh funding for the vertical takeoff and landing aircraft we were developing together. And 4 weeks after I had received the money in the account, my mother calls me and says, your father just had another stroke. He's on his way to hospital. Can you come? And a week later, him passing away set me into this ginormous depressive state, because I wanted this project to work and to do it together, right? For us both to see it flourish, and and so as a result, a lot of mistakes were made, and a lot of the mistakes actually resulted to me saying yes to everything. I agreed to everyone's ideas, which were kind of like the standard approach and not my approach, right? That it took half a year and everything was lost again. It was then, I was a couch potato. I couldn't get my backside off the sofa, I always had different ideas and things that I wanted thinking about strategies of how can I recover from here, right? And I think that is something that from an with an ADHD lens, we're very good at that. We're resilient and always finding different ways. And something that that kind of, again, writing is my outlet. So I started writing the story, not knowing that I had ADHD, and actually writing down my story allowed me to make a little bit more peace with what happened. But from the from the people's pleasing aspect, it was I think the pandemic helped a lot with that, strangely enough, because it was during the pandemic that I was also my son was diagnosed at 2 years old with autism, because he was nonverbal, and it's quite a. I wish I was exaggerating, but he would say single words at 2, but not kind of sentences as he should. And with his autism diagnosis, we were advised that if we can get a dog to motivate his speech and things like that. And the dog, obviously, during the pandemic, that were out of the question because of price hikes and all that kind of stuff. A dog was like £3,000. We didn't have money like that lying around. And so I did a lot of research. And the way that we were able to actually help him was to get chickens.
Okay.
We picked up 2 chickens from, the local... she calls herself Crazy Chicken Lady. So we picked up 2 chickens from there. And again, I wish I was exaggerating. We picked them up at 10 o'clock in the morning. At 1 o'clock, I walked Johan to the to nursery, and I asked him where the chickens were. From speaking 1 to 2 words, he went to saying the chickens are in the chicken coop, a whole 7-word sentence. Like within 3-4 hours.
Wow.
And that was transformational for me to understand of the unconventional approach to things, right? I never imagined that the impact that chickens could have, right? I didn't think that it was going to be so impactful. But it's back to your question, that every step that we take breaks down walls, right? So my whole entire view of the world had to be broken down for me to rebuild it up again.
That's fascinating. Just going back to the chickens, and again, forgive my ignorance, but what is it about adding chickens into your son's environment that allowed him to engage verbally that way? I'm fascinated by that.
No, I was asking the same question, and we have a falconry here close by, and we went to visit them, and I explained them this story. And usually people are like, yeah, you're out of your mind, you're exaggerating X, Y, and Z. And this guy, the owner of the place, he goes, no, I believe you. We have nonverbal autistic children all the time, and we have to record them, the children who have never actually, they're on they're completely nonverbal. So they have to record videos for their children of how they're speaking to owls. And the way that he described it was very interesting. Animals don't judge. Animals don't judge.
That's interesting.
And actually, I'm getting goosebumps saying that, to be quite honest, because that is, our whole lives, we are filled with judgment.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And do I say the right thing? Do I sound stupid if I say it this way? And animals don't judge. That's how he described it to me. And
That's extremely interesting. I I I'm now starting to learn, and very early days of the mix of, Wired for Winning is about ADHD primarily, but I don't think you can lock that into one set of people. I think there's an overlap, you know, with conditions, and I don't know about you, but one of the things that presents itself to me is, and I've mentioned this guy before, a friend of mine, Peter Shankman. He wrote, he has another podcast. He's based in New York. His podcast is called Faster Than Normal. He wrote a book on a similar subject, and he talks on various things around the world. And Peter was the first person to explain this to me that resonated with me. When I first meet somebody, within 10 seconds, I have in my faster than normal brain made friends with them, had an argument with them, fallen out with them, broken up with them, and made friends again. And that process takes place in 10 seconds. And when Peter said that to me for the first time, I was like, yeah, that does. And the more people I speak to, but when I walk into a room, I can feel different people's vibrations, mood, but I know who has ADHD and who doesn't. I know that, I get a sense of it, and I don't know why that is. And a lot of people with ADHD say similar things to me. And yet in other social circumstances, I couldn't tell you what a physical body language cue is. I'm blind to that in certain circumstances. But with ADHD people, the tribe, if you like, that I'm connected to, I can get that sense immediately. So I get the animal not judging analogy, completely. You also, Thor, you have an older child as well, that was also diagnosed. Again,
they were, Hannah and Hannah and Johan were diagnosed more or less at the same time, but at the time, so Johan was 2 and Hannah would have been 17 or 18 at the time already. And here again, we always knew that there was something. I don't want to use different, but I can't think of a better word. And Hannah always struggled with memory, right? Memorizing things, and always questioned herself. And it wasn't until her A levels where they were like, if she doesn't get diagnosed now, then she will fail, because she's not getting the support that she needs. And she's definitely, because she had to change schools, and people kept telling us that we're crazy, and we're not getting there's nothing wrong with her, and all this kind of stuff, right? And it's as a parent, that is the most frustrating thing, when a teacher tells you that you're absolutely out of your mind, because as a parent, when there is something wrong, right? And then feeling that you're not listened to and not taken serious, that's really painful. And unfortunately, we didn't have the resource to do what we did previously, which was move cities for her, essentially, at some point when she was severely bullied in primary school. It woke a lot of pain that I was going through. And so we decided to move from the Black Forest to Cologne, about 3 hours away, to put her into a private British school. It cost us an absolute fortune, but if I had the resources, I would do it again.
That's very interesting. And if I may ask, the point in time between you getting diagnosed yourself and your children becoming diagnosed, you were diagnosed 2 years ago, right?
Oh, yeah. So that it all happened really quickly afterwards, right? So they were diagnosed in 2020, and I was diagnosed in 2022. Okay. So it all happened relatively quickly. And to be quite honest, I am an anomaly in terms of how quickly I got assessed. And I cannot be thankful enough for that. I appreciate it so much that it only took 8 weeks between calling the GP and getting my assessment through the right to choose kind of scheme that we have here. But it was because Hannah had been diagnosed. She was doing what every teenager kind of would do in that circumstance, look online and see, in that sense, TikTok and Instagram and all these kind of things are relatively useful because on a very basic level, it gives an insight as to behaviors and coping mechanisms and so on and so forth. And I remember it like yesterday. This was kind of the moment where the penny dropped for me. We were deep cleaning the kitchen, and all of a sudden I disappear, and I'm sitting on the floor fixing the DVD player, which had been broken for 3 months. Right.
I know this.
It's and I see it. She walks into the living room and goes, "You have ADHD." She points to me and it's like, "You have ADHD." And it kind of repeated itself. And it's again, this awareness piece, right? This behavior isn't new. It's just someone pointing out that what you're doing is completely ADHD. And as this, the behavior, the awareness that surrounded the behavior had a lot of, it affected my relationships, right? Because of the awareness piece, I kind of became more avoidant, or I was always avoidant, but I was hiding in my little man cave here, away from anything, and kind of questioning myself. Well, what if I have ADHD? What does that mean, right? 22nd of December, I called my GP surgery and said I want to be assessed for my ADHD. They sent me a form on my phone. I filled it out immediately. 5th of February 2022, I was then diagnosed.
Just one of the questions I like to ask is, I think in every country in the world, and I've been fortunate to talk to people in the United States, the United Kingdom, Spain, New Zealand, and the like, and a reasonably diverse group of individuals, all commonly with ADHD. But one of the questions I ask is, in where you live, and I think you've kind of answered this already, but where you live, and so the question is 2 parts: the society in which you live, and how does it react to you and your family and your neurodiversity? Are you able to be open to it and not? And then secondarily, how does the workplace, how does the medical system, your GP, and again, I think you've answered this. It was very quick. Do you, here in Ireland, I moved house about 8 years ago. I'm 54. I got diagnosed at 43. And I went to see a GP and said, listen, I've ADHD. Here's a letter from the psychiatrist. Can you prescribe me some Ritalin, please? And he said, yeah, no problems at all. And when we moved house, I went to a different doctor and he said, I won't prescribe for you. And I said, but I have a letter from a psychiatrist in my notes. It's okay. I've been, taking it for a number of years. He said, no, we don't do that here. And I felt like a second-class citizen. No, I said, look, I'm sorry. I will have to go back to my previous GP and continue down the route that I've been going down. And I walked away feeling slightly sad for others out there who may not be as tenacious as me and forthright and so on and so forth. And Ireland is coming along a little bit. I spoke to a lady, Annie Romanos, who lives in New Zealand, and she said to me, the best thing that they ever had was a young prime minister. That she was in her 20s, I think, and she said the amount of money that was pumped into the ecosystem for neurodiversity and various disablements, if you want to call it that, was fantastic, and I was delighted to hear that. In Spain, not quite so much. In the UK as well, as and America is slightly further, more advanced as well. How do you feel in your immediate surroundings?
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I've just come back from visiting my sister in Germany, and I, funny enough, I was on a German IP, so I was fed German YouTube documentaries. And I still have the feeling that Germany is lagging behind with the discussion on ADHD. They're discussing it, but I think I have the impression that they're lagging behind. In terms of just to elaborate on that, I think, in Germany, the way that I experienced upbringing or how children are brought up is far more liberal to the way that children are brought up in the UK. So, jumping on the sofa wildly and getting up and down from the dining table isn't necessarily uncommon, right? I remember when I was younger, my parents were like, "Oh, the English children are always so well behaved; they sit still at the table," right? Which, okay, sorry, but you see it more, in Germany. I mean, I've had a discussion there. Children in Germany still, when they go to primary school at 6 or 7 years old, they walk alone to their primary school. You wouldn't necessarily see that in the UK, or at least I'm not familiar.
I
with
agree
it.
with you. Yes,
but but in terms of the environment, I was so relieved when I was in receipt of my ADHD diagnosis, and again, the psychiatrist telling me that I had a traumatic life. It was like, holy moly, I do, and this is why, right? For me, there was kind of like this light bulb moment, and that light bulb moment then kind of went into a deep dive, which I needed to shovel myself out of, but. So I did share with a lot of people that I have ADHD, which I don't necessarily regret. But I got a personal message from what I would have called a personal friend of ours, who is a GP themselves, and their message to me was, "You can go to this church in London, and they will heal you from your ADHD." And I felt awful. Actually, I'm getting angry just saying it now, because I don't need healing. I need understanding of, I finally got a handbook, a manual of why I was acting the way that I was. I don't need healing, right? I needed processing the trauma that I've gone through the manual that I've just been given with my ADHD diagnosis. And yeah, I found that very upsetting. And I think that there is still this stigma of ignorance. And I must admit to you, when my children were in primary school, when we moved back to the UK, I was also one of those parents who didn't believe ADHD. It's like ADHD is a fake thing. The children haven't been disciplined. I've said horrible things in my time out of ignorance. But we need to remove that ignorance and actually just, and not respond in anger, but understanding that they are just ignorant.
Yeah, the world is changing. The way I always see it now, and I don't come from any position of knowledge whatsoever. I'm on the same journey as everybody I've spoken to as well. The world is moving forward, understanding is moving forward, and I think hopefully our voices out there and others will help with that. And I was talking to a lady yesterday, and she on LinkedIn, and I can't even remember how I was connected to her. Indian lady, very well educated, and she had just done a LinkedIn course on neurodiversity in the workplace. And I saw it and I thought, oh, I'll note that down and I'll do that course myself, And I messaged her directly and I just said, it's wonderful to hear of people who are doing courses like this. I have ADHD. I was diagnosed at 43 and I do this podcast if you'd to be interested in doing an episode. And she came back to me immediately, as ADHD people do. And she said, I was just diagnosed, 2 weeks ago, George. Thank you so much for reaching out. And she messaged me this morning and she said, I stayed up all night and watched all your episodes. And I was like, thank you. Thank you for doing that. You didn't have to. But you're right. What I'm fascinated is taking people, I've been talking to a number of people about this, is when you've got a workplace, like what I call that typical office environment, right? That I personally hate. I can't stand it. But I do wonder if in my other job as a technology consultant, I build teams up of people with certain skills, and you always know that a personality will be able to go and fix that problem. Not necessarily the education or the skills, the technical skills that they have. But when you add the additional layer on top of neurodiversity and you're considering building a team, I still, at this moment in time, if I was to draw that out, what my opus of team alpha would be and what that would comprise, there would definitely be somebody who's autistic in there, definitely somebody with ADHD, definitely somebody with Asperger's, right? And that's probably the programming team if you're building a computer application, because they're damn good at it, right? Let's be frank about that. And I so far, and I want to find somebody out there who knows about this, and I want to interview them. What is that, that magnum opus team of neurodiversity that will really just charge forward and get something done? What environment needs to be created for them to be able to perform well? What clothing do they need to be able to wear? The soft clothing. I love my soft clothing, as I'm sure you probably do as well. And what else? You know what I mean? What drinks, what food?
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring this up, because I've always been entrepreneurial, right? So I've always had my own business, and I never really had to work necessarily with a whole lot of people. But But at some point, I was in such a depressive state. I wasn't able to provide for my family, right? So I said, I need to find a job. I wasn't able, no one wanted to hire me. Don't ask me why, but, you know, I just wasn't, my CV wasn't good enough, or, you know, and it was, I've been working in recruiting now for 2 years almost. And I came into that role by pure accident, right? So they were building a task force in this recruiting space. And there's basically this lady called, let's call her Chloe. She turns up first day of the work on the day, and by 12 o'clock she goes, I'm going out for vape, right? And we joke about this in our team still, because she never came back. So we say that Chloe evaporated. Chloe evaporated. And so that kind of then made room for me. I came through an agency basically, who my friend also then kind of got into the role herself. And it was challenging to go in because I felt not worthy. I needed to prove myself, because I didn't go through the normal channels to get that role, if that makes sense, right? I didn't get a typical interview. It was like, okay, we need someone, and it felt like a second class kind of employee. I wasn't the first choice, right? The guy on the bench, basically. But because it's also it was a very repetitive role, put into this role the analytical side. So I started actually building my own spreadsheets and analyzing people's attendance, people's behaviors, and so on and so forth. And surprisingly, through actually also scripting my own scripts and learning the psychological aspects, right, of speaking to people and approaching them and all this kind of things, we were able to get the attendance for assessments from, I think it was just under 40% to, at the moment, an average of 84%. Right. And I am flabbergasted, really. It's like, that is it's not only my achievement. I don't want to claim it's a lot of elements, yes, right? But it's that I was fortunate enough to have a lot of freedom inside the role. I'm told, well, we want you to fill the assessments. We want you to do this. And I basically used each week to see how I could improve next week. Because for me, just filling the assessments would have just killed me. The repetitive aspect of it. I needed the purpose of making it better every week and finding ways of improving it every week. That was my purpose.
That's fascinating. And what a significant output as well in terms of improvement. If we were Lean Six Sigma people in a factory, that would be kind of employee of the decade, I think, to be able to do that. It's very interesting.
We don't get any recognition. Unfortunately, we live in a world where we are underappreciated, overworked, and underpaid. It's unfortunate. I think that is this is a generalization for everything. I think that employers are very good at, you have 0-hour contracts, right? You have what you call it, the temporary contracts, right? Fixed term contracts. Companies, I from what I've seen, companies like doing that because it makes you feel expendable, right? and it you know, and it is I think it is a challenge where everybody is so overworked that the appreciation piece somewhere kind of falls under the carpet.
Right. You're absolutely right.
You know, it's like, I don't mean to not appreciate you, but I'm so busy that I can't appreciate everyone for the work that they to the level that they deserve.
You're right. That's interesting. I have an ADHD, a pre-diagnosis ADHD story for you. I've never told this on the podcast before. I got the sack when I was 18 years old in England. I used to work at a petrol station, and like you, this is way before diagnosis, and I'd be behind the counter and people would come in, they'd fill up their car, I'd take their credit card and they'd take the payment, and it was dull. It was as dull as shit, Thor, right? I mean, in an ADHD brain, 8 hours a day, and you're like, oh, fuck me, here we go again, you know, but you needed the money, right? So, you know, cha-ching. So I decided one day, and I got the sack from this job, and I'll tell you the funny story behind it. I thought it would be a wonderful idea to bring my Monopoly game in and put it on the counter, and every person who came in would roll the dice and I'd play with the customers, right? I thought, what a wonderful idea. You know, it relieves my boredom, I'm doing my job, and I'm having fun at the same time. And I got the sack for it. And I never forget that.
I love that, though. I love that. That's amazing. But it is those unconventional elements, right? That make us more productive.
Yes,
essentially, right? We're in a happier place. I also tell you something. I joined this disability group that companies nowadays have, right? They all have kind of these extracurricular groups, right? And I joined this disability group, and I thought I was going to make such an impact. And it was October. October is ADHD Awareness Month, I believe. And I basically, in preparation for this this month, I was asked to join a meeting with one of the leading organizations for ADHD corporate awareness training or whatever. And when I joined the meeting, the two gentlemen were chatting, small talk. I was completely lost in that small talk. I'm like, what are we talking about here? I'm in the wrong place here. I personally, I can't do small talk, right? When we go to meetings, or like when we have corporate meetings, it's kind of like, I don't do small talk. I just storm in the door. It's like, here I am. What are we doing? Right? It's like, let's get it on.
I know.
And everyone's like, oh, hi there. No, there you are. But in this meeting, it's quite worrying for me coming out of that meeting, because that manager was so impressed by what was saying, but the person doesn't have ADHD himself, but then kind of teaching this course. It was a very condescending atmosphere, I felt, in terms of, well, you know, we can talk about how they do it like that, you know, and I'm like, I'm in the room here, I have ADHD, you should know that. You know, it was I felt really condescended. And then the manager go like, oh, well, maybe we can persuade them to give us a special deal. I'm like, no, don't ask them to do anything, because you want to stay far away from this organization to train anybody from anything. But that was exactly the catalyst for me to say, okay, ADHD Awareness Month is coming up. Let me put things together. And it was like, I put together this very interesting, it was Cody Warner. He talks about his ADHD, very, very interesting, and also different concepts. He compared the pogo stick to a bike, right? ADHDers are pogo sticks and bikes are neurotypicals. and he's like, okay, try riding a pogo stick like a bike. And he's rolling around on the floor trying to kind of maneuver. And it's like, it's a pain in the backside. You can't get anywhere. So in this very short video, his message was basically, okay, if you're riding a bike, ride it like a bike. If you're a pogo stick, accept the way that you're operating, basically. And initially, that video, that post that I was preparing to publish in the internal platform was like, oh yeah, this is great, fantastic, X, Y, and Z. And the next day, the first thing coming into the office in the morning, the first email I go, well, maybe it's a bit too much, and maybe we just put the poster up of what ADHD means, right? Like the benefits and I'm like, I can't be part of this group anymore. So I resigned as co-chair, and I posted my own videos of how ADHD is affecting me.
What a great way round.
And and to be quite honest, I've been doing that consistently, and people are like, wow, actually people are resonating with that. People who don't have ADHD, and I think this is my message to the world, if I can call it that, is, to get it. There's nothing wrong with getting a diagnosis. There are so many people struggling in this world who know or don't know that they have a neurodiverse condition, but actually getting a diagnosis is not hindering you. I came up with this phrase like living the life that you were always meant to live, right? Because you're starting to understand yourself, and by being able to do that, you can, it's tough. It's tough to get there, but you're so much happier afterwards.
I would agree with you completely there. It's interesting to see how the world is now starting to understand, and that's the key phrase you used, understand that other people out there aren't necessarily the same as themselves, and can accept that. It's great. Let me ask you another question. The point in time of diagnosis for you and your children. Do you medicate or not? Have you?
I did.
Okay.
I did. Yeah. I did. And I was very hesitant because I am generally very fit. So fit, I'm healthy. I don't take any cholesterol medication or anything like that. And so I was very hesitant to try it. And when I went through the titration process, they first put me on Concerta, which basically, I was like, no, I'm throwing in the towel. I'm not doing it. It felt like my head was splitting in two. And this was like at the lowest dose. What was it, 10 milligrams or something like that. And that was when I then, the ADHD UK charity have like clinics and Ask an ADHD Coach that I joined. And I recommended to anybody who, whether they're diagnosed or not, to join those meetings just to be able to relate to other people. And I think that's actually something that I wrote down. We ADHDers can actually relate to people without judgment, right? So I asked the question, look, this is my experience. Is medication just a plaster on the thing, or what do I do? And their advice was like, well, that's a typical ADHD thing. First try didn't work, you go on to something else, right? And so I was like, okay, well, let me try another medication then. And that then worked for me. But then it also had a negative effect on me, especially when when I couldn't get it. Right, we have in the UK, we have or still have this shortage of medication supply, and I felt again like a total addict, not choosing not to take it, but not being able to take it. It totally messed
that
with
makes
my
sense.
brain.
I can understand that.
Right? Because on the weekends I wouldn't usually take it because I'm not working, I'm not doing anything like that. But all of a sudden someone's telling me, well, you can't take it anymore. My executive function went out of the window. Absolutely out of the window. It drove me absolutely insane. And I cannot explain it why, but I felt such like I felt like such a junkie, like such an addict, not being able to take it when I wanted to take it. And I haven't taken it since probably July or August last year. And I'm trying to just regulate through meditation, exercise, and just different strategies of getting my activation and my focus up. Right, so I use noise cancelling headphones if I need to focus, right? And just not. I know they say like our working memory is the size of a Post-it note, right? So everything that I need to do, everything I need to know right now, I only have on a Post-it note size thing. I don't write anything on a A4 page because all that I'm not going to remember.
I have them here. This is my one. You know, the blocks of paper. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, exactly. And
sorry, go ahead. Keep going, and I'll come back to the question.
No, yeah. I was just going to say that it's every day I'm learning something new about myself, right? And for me, I understand that certain individuals will not be able to cope with the medication, but I think that I have found ways of where I can operate even without the medication. When at some point I believed I needed the medication.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just, at the end of the day, I never wanted to take medication.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think you're right. I do take medication myself, actually. And I was saying to somebody on the podcast last week that after 12 years of taking Ritalin LA, I've switched to another product called Tyvens. One is Ritalin is methylphenidate, and Tyvens is actually amphetamine. I don't take it every day. I don't need to take it every day. On days, on clever days, I have clever and stupid days. That's how I tend to say what it is. On clever days, if I was to take a medication, it would slow me down, right? Completely. On stupid days, they're the days I take medication, and that can be 5 to 10 times a month, right? I mean, most of the time I don't. There are times when I really am feeling like my IQ is about 40 and I'm not able to read or even do simple mathematics or spell or stuff like that, and on those days I do take it. It's kind of interesting to note, you talk about medication, you talk about, a healthy lifestyle, exercise, and so on and so forth. One of the things that I've found very interesting recently is there's still more research to be done on it, is the DNA companies who take the swab from the cheek, and there's five particular genes that if they have a variant, one is called MTHFR, and that particular gene, if it's got a variant, may be responsible for the formation of the prefrontal cortex in the brain, that may be part of. And again, I say classically may. I am not qualified to do this. Yeah. This is my own reading, and please, guys, don't go out there and just do this for the sake of it. But what's fascinating is, in early stage research, of something called methylfolate, not folic acid that women take to get, before they get pregnant, but methylfolate. After taking that for about 2 weeks, it helps with the blood flow in the brain, and also affects something called homocysteine as well, which is partially responsible for higher blood pressure in certain individuals too. And there is early understanding that there may be something which would help with that blood flow in the prefrontal cortex. Again, I don't know the answer to that, but I find that quite fascinating. And I'm going to watch this space as to whether or not there's any more deeper research at a wider level on that. I personally am of the belief, and I think you're right when you mentioned, if somebody just wants to put a poster up, quit, get out of there, right? I don't have anything to do with anybody who will demean my condition. People have a right to their opinion that it doesn't exist. And indeed, there are psychiatrists out there in the world who say, no, it doesn't exist. And that's okay too. And my argument to that is, that, wherever your moral and ethical compass may lay on a particular day, that's okay with you. But just remember, that if you're looking at the medical or the legal areas of life as your moral compass, just remember that once it was illegal to be black, right? And, the world is moving forward. So, and again, I'm sorry, I have a lot to say on this episode because you've prompted me to say a few things as well. And a very close friend called me the other day. I won't mention his name for simple anonymity, but he has a 14-year-old son who's ADHD. And he asked me a question: what do you think about medicating children? And I said, categorically not. And again, I said, I'm not qualified. I'm not a medic. I'm not a researcher. I'm certainly not an expert. I'm just somebody who has ADHD. But I went away in typical ADHD fashion, Thor, and I kind of read up on the subject. And you probably know this yourself, but there is a tremendous amount of evidence to suggest that if you medicate children, that in the long term, the outcome is more positive than if you don't medicate them for their own benefit. Now, I'm struggling with that concept because my as a parent, and I'm sure you are as well, I'd not medicate my 10-year-old son with amphetamines. Jesus, I mean, that just seems so counterintuitive. And yet there is that evidence. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a view on a lot of things, but let me give my general response. Right? I mean, I talk about particularly my ADHD. If I post a video, I talk about how things are affecting me. I try not to tell, or I try not to say this is ADHD. Boom, 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 boom. Right? I do that purposely because I am not an ADHD expert. I'm not I'm an expert on myself, or I'm becoming an expert of myself, but I'm not an expert on other people, right? And I think with ADHD and neurodiversity in general, what might work for me might not work for you, right? I came up with this phrase in a moment of despair, and I wrote down: accepting my emotions and setting boundaries form the foundations for the future of my happiness. Right?
I agree with that.
So accepting my emotions and setting boundaries form the foundations for the future of my happiness. That is my truth. It may not, you may agree with that, but it not necessarily be what
agreed.
Works for you, right? In terms of, I wouldn't want to medicate my children. Again, in this German documentary that I watched, they are doing it, and there's and the parents are happy. But in that documentary was very interesting. The daughter stands up, goes and says, yeah, but I don't like it. I'm not myself. And they're basically on camera, the 12-year-old daughter is having an argument with her mother of like, yeah, but it helps you do your homework. Yeah, but I'm not like, I don't like the way it makes me feel. I would rather kind of turn the question around and say, why don't schools accommodate for the bloody system to accommodate for neurodiverse children, rather than trying to make neurodiverse children act like that is how I went to school. I was put down as a bad student because I couldn't learn the way that they expected me to learn.
Yes.
So be accommodating for neurodiverse children rather than medicating them and kind of just...
Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
I just want to finish. I just want to say, I'm sure there are certain scenarios where medicating is essential. But in general, I would stay firm on that. The school system is broken globally, and we're not accommodating. Like, if I would have been able to learn in school like I am able to learn now, I would have been an A-star student.
I agree. I'm exactly the same as you.
No doubt.
When I was at school, I've said this a few times, when the reports came home to my parents, and because ADHD didn't exist then, they had the subject across like this, and they had two columns. One was attainment and one was effort. And my attainment was always A all the way down.
Oh, they still do that.
And my effort was E all the way through because I didn't need it. But that's not testament to me. But you're right. You shouldn't have to medicate because you've got a kid jumping around in class who can't sit still. You accommodate to make the subject matter interesting. You speed it up or you slow it down to accordingly, so that you've always going to have a bell curve of capability in a classroom. You're always going to have the cleverest kid, and you're always going to have, with respect, the least clever kid, right? And all of those in between. So why can't we add a third dimension of neurodiversity on top of that and get three-dimensional teaching, right? That's what needs to happen here. And whether or not that's now, we're starting to see that here in Ireland, down in New Zealand, where Annie was telling me that they're starting to have, consistent movement breaks now, for all of the kids, not just, let's be honest, what do kids do? They run around, whether they're neurodiverse or not. They run around. They want to kick a ball. They want to sit on the grass or read a book or laze or go to sleep or nap or whatever. You can't say, between 9 and 10, you're going to learn maths, and between 10 and 11, you're going to learn English. It's boring. Let's be honest about that, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Oh, my God.
I mean,
Absolutely.
It's not what it's all about. So accommodate accordingly. And like you, I'm going through my own ADHD experience, and I have things that happen to me. And when I do takeaways at the end of these episodes and they go online, some resonate with some people, some don't from the commentary, and that's fine too. Hopefully, everybody who's interested in listening to, to these things, will take one or two items, and kind of work. Do you, out of interest, how do you feel reflectively that you've come a long way? And do you, or like me, I have great days and then I have shit days. Excuse my language, by the way. I'm just, I like to show.
No, absolutely.
I like to show my vulnerability because I am vulnerable, right? I'm on certain days, on clever days, I'm invulnerable. I'm like a Marvel character of thank you very much. And on other days, I'm the most vulnerable person. I just want to crawl up inside a duvet and not even step outside of the bedroom, right? I don't mind saying that. For you, though, in your experience, how you sound like you've come a tremendous distance from the trauma of the past. losing a father, you know, I've lost mine as well.
Mm.
It resonates with me. And to the point you are now, as you reflect on how far you've come, do you have a path in the future to say, I know where I'm going? And I mean that, you know, from a multifaceted perspective, you know, family, relationships, health, wealth, you know, mental convergence to a better place, you know, that as I call it, the ability to one day sit on the side of a mountain in total peace and quiet, which I've never experienced personally. But, you know, do you see something there?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So let me get back to my original quote: accepting my emotions and setting boundaries form the foundations for the future of my happiness, right? I have terrible days. I have absolute shit days. I have days where I have complete meltdown. Saturdays after a week of terror from trying to meet goals and all this kind of stuff, I'm absolutely shattered. I get tension headaches, tension all over my body. I'm basically sitting in a bath, boiling myself for about an hour. I've had to kind of accept that I'm doing too much. So I'm, again, back to awareness, right? I've become aware of that, and that's not a sustainable way to work. And, you know, the thing with the VTOL aircraft project with my father, I'm still looking to pursue that. But you see, that was our project. I now already am, and it actually involves I have my eye on Ireland.
Excellent.
On another project, I have my eye on Ireland with another project that I'm working through at the moment, which I'm super excited about, which is something that it all came with the concept that, you know, we have, some of us work very productively. We can produce 6 months, 12 months of work in 6 months, and then take the other 6 months off. But other people are not like that, and say, well, I'm struggling to pay my bills. I'm torturing myself through work, through this conventional work environment, just to pay my bills. I don't have a quality of life, right? Because I'm a slave to the system. So there are, I'm using the technology that I've developed in the past. I'm kind of trying to adapt that to the future, and wouldn't it be great if people would be able to live in an accommodation that could be theirs for £30,000?
Yes, it would.
You know, you wouldn't be a slave to the system anymore. And it's very interesting to, you know, I mean, getting up onto the ladder, especially here in the UK, is virtually impossible because rents are so high. You know, there isn't, you know, for a lot of people, meeting ends meet is impossible almost. You know, I mean, they talk about the in a first world country, we're talking about what I don't exactly know. I may be wrong in the figures, but what was it? 3 or 4 out of 10 children don't have breakfast because the children, you know, and it just blows my mind that this is still a thing. But yeah, so I have terrible days. I have fantastic days where I can't stop myself. The problem with us is also that we're very empathetic. Yes. So I, you know, if something is going on with other people, I will always try and be there for them. But again, that then comes back to, well, we need to also set boundaries because I have to also look after myself, right?
Yeah, I share that completely with you. There's I'll send you some very interesting things for the socioeconomic conversation separately to this podcast actually as well. Thor,
Sure.
I'm going to ask one final question as we wrap this up, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this. By the way, it's been an incredible story, and actually, one of the things you said at the beginning is you hope you stood up to the mark, and you certainly have. I think there's a lot of takeaways from this particular podcast as well. It's a wonderful story, sad in places, but I think a story of success, and you've overcome some significant challenges, and that's certainly testament to you, doing that, and I love to hear those stories because they inspire others. As it's inspired me, as I learn every week from different people that I talk to. But the one question is, and I always think I know the answer to this, but I sometimes get surprised. If I could click my fingers and say, "Hey, you are no longer neurodivergent. You're now a neurotypical," would that be okay?
Keep your magic wand in yourself. I don't need a magic wand. I came up with this. It's funny that you asked this, right? A saying that or something that I wrote down recently was, "It is a shame, not a regret, that it took so long for me to get my diagnosis."
Yeah. Absolutely. I'd agree with that. I would absolutely agree with that. Thor, thank you so much. I've totally and thoroughly enjoyed that. I kind of feel we've got so much more to talk about, actually, and I could probably go on, but,
Oh, yeah, let's go.
I'm going to press pause, but if you just hold on for a sec, if that's okay, I'll stop the recording.